And as people join, I'll give a couple announcements before I pass it on to Al-Shaddai to introduce you. Hello, everybody. I see you're joining us one by one. Thank you for coming today. As the webinar begins, I'm going to promote you from attendee to panelist. So if you received this invitation, please accept it so you can share your screen and participate in the Q&A portion. If by some reason I miss you, please raise your virtual hand and I'll make sure to go back and promote you again. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll be starting in just about another minute or so.
And once again, I highly encourage everybody to turn on their camera so that we can make this lecture a bit more personal and more homey feeling for everybody. So if you haven't yet, please accept my panelist invite so you can join with your camera on and ask questions during the Q&A portion. Thank you so much. I think at this time we can get it started and people can join in as we go.
Great. Welcome, everyone, for joining us today. We have Dr. Naya Lekht, who's a scholar on contemporary anti-Semitism and works with the Jewish community to foster pride in the history of the Jewish people. Naya received her PhD in Russian literature from UCLA, where she wrote her dissertation on Holocaust literature in the Soviet Union. In 2018, Naya was a scholar in residence at Oxford through ISGAP. She's a passionate educator and curriculum developer. And in 2019, she joined as Director of Education at Club Z, a Zionist youth movement. Naya is currently teaching Zionism, the history of anti-Semitism, and working on her book, tentatively titled Zionism in the Diaspora, Reclaiming Israel Education. So without further ado, Naya, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Al-Shaddai. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and big thank you to ISGAP, really, for fostering this series, fostering scholars, supporting them. I'm really, really grateful. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I see we have a small, intimate group, and which I actually like, because the way that I love to deliver these webinars is really in conversation with participants. And so if I ask a question, I actually would love for people to engage and answer. I'm not rhetorically asking the question. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. All right. So the title of this, webinar presentation is The Topology of Anti-Semitism from Definition to Identification. Just a few cursory remarks on the title itself. While the term topology is covers a variety of fields. I'm using it as it relates to topos, which is a means of seeing patterns within literary texts. But I'm also interested in seeing patterns and connectivity in terms of language, of signifier and signified. So I'm really interested in understanding the language that anti-Semites use in order to convey classical modes of anti-Semitic expression. So that's kind of how I'm using the word topology here. I want to just briefly give a roadmap for who I am and how my own identity informs my research and my approach to the study of anti-Semitism. I have been in academia for many years, but I transitioned into more of a interest in pedagogy and education. And I work mostly with high school students and with college students. And I'm interested in developing new pedagogical approaches, in particular, when we're talking about anti-Semitism. So today, what I'm going to do is cover very briefly traditional methods of teaching, when I mean teaching about anti-Semitism, present a new approach that I developed, and talk about the benefits of this new approach, and all through the lens of pedagogy, of how do we do a better job teaching. So kind of very zoomed out view, when we talk about the struggle to combat anti-Semitism in the diaspora as it relates to education, you have two major venues, if you will. You have a really established field known as Holocaust education, especially in the United States of America, where really students are primed and completely understand the dangers of Nazi ideology, the dangers of racism. But unfortunately, what has happened is that they then conflate racism with all forms of anti-Semitism. And I'll discuss that in a bit. The second place where you'll find quote unquote education on anti-Semitism was within Jewish institutions such as ADL, AJC, Museum of Tolerance, Shoah Foundation. And if you look at the way that they are talking about anti-Semitism, it's very universalized. So like no place for hate, fighting intolerance, pyramid of hate. So they have this, they tend to gravitate towards more of a universalistic framing of this phenomenon of anti-Semitism. But I argue that actually anti-Semitism is very particular, and we'll see why. Now, before I kind of present my approach, I want to show you two case studies of education that stems from, number one, from Holocaust education. The first is, there was a high school in Los Angeles, and the topic was remembering Kristallnacht, and this was 2018, and students came up to the board, and they had a whole week of remembering Kristallnacht, and the students came up to the board, and they, as you can see, they put a sticker, and I'll show you zoomed in what each sticker says. So here's zoomed in. I will not be silent in the face of rape culture. So as a result of Kristallnacht. I will not be silent in the face of sexism as a result of Kristallnacht. I will not be silenced in the face of hate, homophobia, environmental degradation, and gun violence or any hate. Okay, so this is what students decided to put when during their week that they decided to learn, that the school learned about Kristallnacht. Now, none of these are terrible or wrong per se, but it does raise a question of how are we teaching about or the Holocaust? And you could see the gravitation towards universalism has this output, which is that Kristallnacht was about anti-Semitism. It wasn't about rape culture, and it wasn't about environmental degradation. It was about anti-Semitism. Yet the students learned that as a result of Kristallnacht, this is their takeaway. We can discuss this later, what this means. The second case study that I'd like to offer you is myself. In 2018, after finishing ISGAP, I created a course on I called it the anatomy of anti-Semitism. That's when I still foolishly believed that you write the word anti-Semitism with a dash. So pardon me there. And so I taught it to a senior seminar at a Jewish day school. And as you could see, the way that I taught about it was very chronological and topical. And I introduced to them two kind of important definitions. One was the 3D test developed by Natan Sharansky, which is delegitimization of the Jewish people of Israel, demonization, and applying double standards. So these 3D. And the other, of course, at that time, in 2018, they were developing the IRA definition, the working definition for anti-Semitism. And I thought to myself that this is the best gift that the Jewish world can give to students, to even lawyers, to give a framework for understanding what anti-Semitism is. And then this happened. Around week 5 of the class, I showed the students these two images. And I asked them, is this an example of anti-Semitism? And if so, and if it is, how so? And the students, by and large, told me this is not anti-Semitism. This is criticism, though extreme. This is criticism of the IDF and Israel. Why? Because they were focusing on the what and the who. They were focusing on, meaning they were focusing on the arm and the child. They said that the arm, because it depicts the IDF, this is criticism of the IDF. Now, these are 12th grade kids going to college, and they do not see a problem. Yes, they said it was extreme, but they do not see this as anti-Semitism. Likewise, when I showed them this image, they said, while it's, again, extreme, we cannot deny that Israel was born from a war, right? And in war, people die. So, blood is lost when there's war, and flags represent political sovereignty of a country. So and I thought to myself, my gosh, something is not working in terms of pedagogy, because to me, and I don't know if all of you here in the audience, but to me, this is clearly anti-Semitic. And I thought, what's going on? I gave them IRA, I gave them the 3D, I gave them a blood libel, right? So this is where I would like to introduce the way that I teach anti-Semitism to high school students as well as college students. I propose moving away from the IRA definition. And I know that sounds radical, and I will explain later on. But one of the first things that I ask students wherever I speak is I ask them, when did anti-Semitism begin? When do they date the beginning of this hatred? And some students, many students actually, say the Holocaust. Some students, and it's very interesting because I speak to a plethora of schools, say, well, they would date the beginning of Jew hatred to when Jews were enslaved in Egypt. So we have these really disparate responses. And, then I reveal to them that, anti-Semitism or Jew hatred is really the longest hatred. This was dubbed by Robert Wistrich, the foremost scholar on anti-Semitism, which brings us to the question, if it's the longest hatred, what is the word anti-Semitism? Where does it come from? And to do that, I do a little thought experiment with them. And so allow me to do this with you as well. I say to them, let's take a look at the topology of cup. And remember, I'm using the word topology as in the field of study of relationship between the relational nature between words. Okay, I say to them, this is a cup, and this is a cup, but this is a glass bottle, and this is a flask, and this is a martini glass, and this is a wine glass, and this is a cup. And so they laugh and they think it's funny, but what I'm trying to do for them is show them that there's a function. Each one of these has the same function, and that is that the function is to hold liquid, okay? We call one cup, we call it a flask, we call it a martini glass, but they're really functionally the same. Now, why does this matter to anti-Semitism? Because the term anti-Semitism was coined in 1878 by Wilhelm Marr, okay? So Wilhelm Marr creates this new word to talk about something that existed for hundreds of years, right? If I ask them, I always ask the students, you just told me that anti-Semitism began when when the Jewish people were in Egypt. So how is it that only in 1878 we have the appearance of this word? What does this mean? What was he trying to do? And this is an important moment to, again, express how language, the shift in language, really echoes the evolving nature of anti-Semitism. So I created this kind of model for students where on the very top, it's not a very scientific, it's very not scientific, it's Jew hatred. But refracted through three eras. One is Judeophobia, the era of Judeophobia, the Middle Ages or medieval Europe, anti-Semitism, the 19th century, and today anti-Zionism. And I showed them that there was a shift from Judeophobia to anti-Semitism. The shift was from hatred of Jews based on their religious character to hatred of Jews based on their racial character, right? And so in each era, what we have is we have the anti-Semitism evolves and the language evolves, right? Cup, flask, martini glass, but functionally it's the same thing, right? You have here Judeophobia, the idea that Jews violate Christianity, right? They're violators, the tenets of Christianity. They didn't get on quote unquote the salvation train. They didn't accept Jesus Christ. Well, as Europe evolves post-Enlightenment, now Jews are violators of the purity of race. Now you have a new language, you have a new term. And so Wilhelm Marr was a genius because what he did is he packaged old hatred with a new language. And this language was quote unquote progressive at that time, right? But each time what's functionally happening is that each word signals to what is it that the Jew is violating within that particular time period. Today, and I ask all the students, is it good to be an anti-Semite? Of course, it's not good to be an anti-Semite. So what does the anti-Semite do? They say, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm an anti-Zionist. Just like Wilhelm Marr would, I'm not a Judeophobe, I'm an anti-Semite. And so anti-Zionism, once again, it's a new word, but again, Jews, now Zionists, once again, are violators of human rights. So in this kind of framework or paradigm, what I'm showing to the students is that anti-Semitism is an evolving hatred, but functionally, you see, it's still the same. Functionally, it's a way to see Jews as violators of something that the society at that time deems to be morally pure, let's say. Now, this is not my idea. This is the idea of Rabbi Sachs, the idea that if anti-Semitism is an evolving hatred, we can liken it to a virus. And I say, well, what do we know about viruses? That they attack the host body, that they take over the host body. They can be slow acting or fast acting. They cannot reproduce on their own. And for us, the important thing is that they have a unique DNA or RNA structure and they evolve and mutate. So points 5 and 6 are very important if we want to keep to the analogy of anti-Semitism as a virus. And so in moving away from a definition, I thought to myself, what is the structural code of anti-Semitism? If I could write the code or the DNA of anti-Semitism, what would it be? And what I decided is I looked, and I'm mostly looking at Europe, right, continental Europe. And I looked at the 6 major accusations. The sequence being blood libel, world domination, demonization, dual loyalty, dehumanization, avarice, or greed. And I, jokingly somewhat call it the nucleotide sequence. So this is the sequence of this DNA of anti-Semitism. So that it doesn't really matter what the definition per se is. If I know what blood libel is, I can recognize it, whether it's in the 14th century or the 21st century. So let me show you blood libel. This is what I show to the students. And in this way, I'm able to help them recognize anti-Semitism. It's really because of that class in 2018, and in many ways, the failure. I failed those students. I had to reimagine a new pedagogical approach to teaching about anti-Semitism because the definition did not help them. So IRA didn't help them. 3D didn't help them. So I had to go back to kind of the drawing board and see how can I help students and really anybody interested in teaching about this, simplify it in a way to help people identify it. Because we can't talk about combating anti-Semitism if we don't know what we're looking for. So one of the first nucleotides or sequences is blood libel. And we know that it originates from 12th century England with the murder of this boy, William, in Norwich. This is one of the earliest icons or images that we have. He was crucified. His blood was drained. A monk later came into town and wrote a hagiography, or a life of the saint of William. And in his hagiography, in the life of the William, he inserted that the Jews, it happened to be around Passover, and that the Jews killed him and used his blood for the making of matzah. And this libel, you know, I tell the students, just it spread so quickly, and it still exists today. So I show them this. So if we look at this, and we're going to return to this at the end, as somebody who comes from a field of literature, I studied literature, right? I want to look at the topo, at the trope, not so much the who. I'm not interested in who is being depicted. I'm interested in the how, the device. And the device here is blood libel. And it's unique to Jews and only Jews. Only Jews have that blood libel. So I showed them a kind of I canvass all this blood libel in the Palestinian Media Watch, on campuses, in the New York Times. Right. And then the second nucleotide sequence is world domination, this idea that Jews control the world. Now, this has resurfaced and slightly mutated too. So I'm going to talk about that mutation a little later. But this particular accusation stems from 1903, Russian Empire. The Tsar declared that he found a document, obviously we know it was forged, called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, where there's a whole plan of the secret Jewish cabal to take over the world. Once again, just like with blood libel, these lies, they spread really quickly, and they become very popular. So this is from France, this is from the Soviet Union. It says the Israeli extremist appetite, and this in Russian says Arabskie strany, or Arab countries. And you see this general, bloodthirsty general who's taking over the entire he's taking over the Arab countries in general, right? This idea that Jews want to take over the world or parts of the world. Here, the Jewish spider or the Israeli spider is taking over the Middle East. Here we have, I don't know if you guys know, but this was actually printed in the New York Times in 2018, I believe, or 19, where you have Bibi being led, Trump being led by Bibi, you know, this blind president is being controlled by a Jew dog. So that's world domination. And that one is particularly interesting because it has resurfaced in the 21st century. Same with demonization. The third of that nucleotide sequence is demonization, and it really comes from 3rd or 4th century, again, Europe, with Christianity, with the idea that because Jews did not accept Jesus Christ, there was, you know, Jews became arch enemy number one of Christianity. And so the idea was, you know, Jews, they take the form of a human, but they're really doing nefarious work. They cannot be trusted. They have these supernatural powers, right? So don't, you know, Jews, you know, they have a mask. Here we have, this is from the Soviet Union. It says Stalin has taken off his mask. And lo and behold, what do we have here? A Jew demon. We have from Ilhan Omar, Israel has hypnotized the world, may Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. This idea that Jews can hypnotize, have these supernatural powers. This, by the way, together with this is why I think it's very dangerous to conflate racism with anti-Semitism, because racism is the idea that one race is superior to another, but usually racists view the race, the people that they don't like, as subhuman. But you see, anti-Semitism, because it's such an evolving and complex virus, it's not that Jews are just subhuman, they're superhuman, right? They're demonic, they can control the world, they control weather patterns, as we know, and they control the world. So that's why it's a little bit short-sighted of us to conflate racism with anti-Semitism. I will return to this particular image as both world domination and demonization have had a slight, what I call, mutation in the 21st century. Dual loyalty is another really important nucleotide in that sequence of identifying anti-Semitism. This idea really comes from the French emancipation of the Jews in the 18th century, where, it was famously declared by Count Tonnerre. He said, we'll give Jews as individuals everything, but Jews as a people, as a nation, nothing. And in that declaration, what he did, maybe inadvertently, is insert this idea into the world that there is the Jewish individual, but there's also the Jewish nation. And how can we trust the Jew? And this, unfortunately, has come up countless of times. In 2014, a Jewish student in UCLA was running for student senate. And this was the question that was posed to her. Given that you are a Jewish student and are very active in the Jewish community, how do you see yourself being able to maintain an unbiased view, especially when it comes to Israel? Just imagine for a second if that would be asked to another minority group. Given that you are a Black student and are very active in the African-American community, how do you see yourself being able to maintain an unbiased view, especially when it comes to race relations? Right? Unacceptable. This particular student was writing a piece on anti-Semitism in her high school newspaper. She was the editor-in-chief, and this teacher told her that because she's the editor-in-chief of the school newspaper and a Jew, she's using her position as a Jew in power to further her Jewish agenda. So you see dual loyalty has come up again, and this is a kind of a lesser known postcard from Austria from 1919 called Stab in the Back. The Jews really stabbed Germany in the back during World War I. That the Jews within Germany were not really loyal to Germany. Stalin used this all the time. He referred to the Jews as the fifth column, right? This idea that, can you really trust the Jew? Dehumanization. Now, this is the one that shares the most with racism. And this is the anti-Semitism of Wilhelm Marr. This is the anti-Semitism of eugenics, right? This is the Holocaust. And so the word anti-Semitism really belongs in this era. This is not anti-Zionism. Anti-Zionism does not see Israel as a subhuman country, if you will. So, right, this idea that Jews are like spiders or like rats, this is a very famous from the Nazi newspaper, Der Stürmer, the spider. This is from Soviet Union. Actually, it says the Zionist, it says Zionism, and this is, and each, by the way, each of these is this says the Jewish question. I can't read the rest. Oh, Jewish question, right? Oh, anti-Semitism. That the Jewish spider, the Zionist spider, is weaving these Jewish agendas. This is from Palestinian Media Watch. I don't know if you can see the Jewish star on the rat. And of course, the Soviet Union, which birthed anti-Zionism. You hear it says Zionism, the weapon of imperialism, with a spider. It's not the last. Yes, this should be number 6. My apology. The last of that nucleotide sequence in blood libel, world domination, demonization, dual loyalty, dehumanization. The 6th one, pardon, it should say 6, is money or greed. This idea that Jews are obsessed with money. You can't really trust the Jews. They'll sell you. It comes from Judas. I would say he sold Christ. And so from there on, also Jews were put in positions of money lenders. So there's always been a link between Jews and money. Now, I'm talking as an educator, and I'm through the lens of pedagogy. I see the following kind of phenomenon. As I say, I see Jew hatred, and then I see these 3 words. And each one of these words has a particular trope during that particular time that is most prominent. So during the era of Judeophobia, the most prominent accusations or tropes was blood libel and demonization. During the era of anti-Semitism, the most prominent tropes was dual loyalty, dehumanization, and world domination. During our time of anti-Zionism, that is not to say that we do not still face as Jews classical anti-Semitism or even Judeophobia. Within anti-Zionism, these, I would say, are the most powerful tropes to resurface again. but there's been slight mutations to each one of these. So blood libel pretty much stays the same as, just want to show you, right? Blood libel, look, it's pretty much, this was the New York Times. This was during the Gaza conflict in 2020. They were just children, and all these kids who look, mostly they are Arab kids. And by the way, we now know that a lot of those kids were killed by misfiring of rockets from Hamas itself. But that doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Truth here doesn't matter, because what they're doing is they're telling the story of Israel is killing children. So let's take a look at two significant mutations. Does anybody have any questions so far? Or do you want to?
We have a question in the Q&A portion that might be interesting. Anita Brom asks if we should also hyphen if we shouldn't hyphen anti-Zionism based on the anti-Semitism hyphen.
I'm not sure. Can we leave that towards the end? Is that okay? It's a good question. I've never really thought, I have thought about it a bit, but I'm not sure. I will answer that question. So I want to talk about two significant mutations, and that is world domination and demonization. Yes, we have people today who believe still that Jews control, the banks. We had the Kanye phenomenon. We have Goyim TV, which is a anti-Semitic group that basically peddles classical forms of anti-Semitism, of Jews controlling the world. But we have another, it has been resurfacing in a slightly different way, and that is through the words of power, privilege, and colonialism. Jews have power, Jews are privileged, Israel is colonial. Okay, demonization, similarly. We don't walk around thinking that there are devils, right? Normal people in the 21st century do not believe in demons. But if you ask someone, what is the most evil thing? It is apartheid, racism, and Nazism. So what they do now is they say, okay, if in the 4th, 5th, 6th century Jews are devils, Israel is that which is evil, demonic. So that's that slight mutation. I want to discuss this particular mutation with you all today for a second. This stems from much of my work working with mostly high school students who are being told in schools that because they are white, they have privilege. But more than that, because Israel is a European colonial entity and in the position of power, it exerts its power over the underdog, there being the Palestinians. So power is the operative word here. Through the focal point of this binary power and powerlessness, what I argue is that you have these fields of inquiry or study, such as history, social contract, morality, truth, and justice. When you refract it through power, history becomes narrative, right? Who's telling the story? Social contract, it's not really, people can now exert change from the bottom up. You have grassroots efforts. Morality is really relative. There really isn't no truth, and there's no truth. It's all personal. And justice now has a qualifier. It's social justice. And this, I argue, and please, if you disagree, I'd love to hear your perspectives or have something to add to this. I argue comes from Michel Foucault, really, and neo-Marxism, and this idea that the world really can be boiled down to this power and powerlessness binary. So colonial versus indigenous, white versus BIPOC, heteronormative, LGBTQ+, non-binary. And where does Israel find itself in that binary? It finds itself in the position of power vis-a-vis the narrative that Jews are colonial. So take a look at this slight mutation, as I call it, in world domination, right? This idea that Jews control the world. We see this with this classical leaflet. This, I don't know how many of you are aware, was making the circles on social media and on college campuses. This was left, and I think this was made by Goyim TV, right? This is kind of this classical idea that Jews are, really controlling the world. There's a pyramid, and Jews are at the very top of that hierarchy. This was a very infamous mural in London. These bankers, these capitalists are sitting, and there's money, and their entire table is being is on the backs of what it seems to be slaves or people of color. Though the word Jew is not mentioned, what people called attention to is the facial caricature of the way that it was these people were depicted in this classical kind of almost 19th century Jew banker. And of course, we have the Illuminati symbol, which is another conspiratorial idea of some sort of control. Somebody's controlling something in the back. And this, to us, we see this and we're very well educated. We're primed. We say, oh, okay, this we know. This is, world domination. This slight mutation has now, I believe, resurfaced within anti-Zionism, where you see Jews or Israel as being the colonialists. That's who's in power, colonialists. Colonialists are bad. That's what Israel is. Decolonizing Israel, liberating Palestine. This is that framework of power, right? Zionism, settler colonialism, the case of one democratic state. Just an example. Demonization. I spoke about this a little bit before. We do not believe that there are devils walking around, but we believe that there's evil, right? And we know that Nazism is evil. We know that racism is evil, right? So what do? We now connect, right? Topology, the connectivity. We connect Jews or Israel with that which is evil, right? You have this depiction of comparing the Holocaust experience to the Palestinian experience, Nazi-occupied Poland, Israel-occupied Palestine. This is from the Soviet Union. By the way, that accusation that Israel is the Nazis or Zionism is Nazism is also from the Soviet Union. This is the Nakba narrative right here, right? That Israel murdered. This, this is blood libel. There's so many at once, right? And you can have many of these at once. This idea that the very Jewish state is evil, is predicated on evil, is predicated on murdering children. So finally, returning back to this diagram, which is, I think, very important, it helps from pedagogical perspective, it helps students understand that Jew hatred is an evolving hatred. It's a virus and it mutates. And the word in each era points to that which society at that time deems to be its moral or northern star. So once again, I'm just reiterating that in the medieval era, medieval Europe, Jews were violators of Christianity, right? Judeophobia. 19th century, Jews are violators of the purity of race. That's the word of anti-Semitism. And today, anti-Zionism, Zionists or Israel are violators of human rights. And just to kind of open parentheses for a second, I had a very interesting student one day ask me, well, can you forecast anti-Semitism from 100 years from now? If it is evolving and mutating, what will it look like? They asked me, in 100 years. And I said, oh, this is what I believe. I said, an interesting indicator will be what society deems to be moral, because then the Jew will be that which violates that morality. But we don't know. We don't know. But it showed me that the student was thinking in a critical way about the fact that anti-Semitism evolves. And it's important because, once again, with IRA is very, very helpful. But I'm going to return to this. Once you identify something, you codify it, right? Once you kind of put a bracket and you say, this is what this is. But we know that anti-Semitism evolves and mutates, right? We know. So I believe it's a bit short-sighted for us to rely so heavily on the IRA definition. And in fact, when teaching about anti-Semitism, I almost never teach the IRA definition. I know this sounds probably radical, but it doesn't help students identify anti-Semitism. I rather use these 6 accusations and liken it to a viral DNA sequence. And I'll give you just one example. I was on a call a few weeks ago, and it was a strategic planning call. And there was a woman who asked, "Oh, Naya, do you think that the Black Hebrew Israelites chanting, 'We are the real Jews,' is that anti-Semitic according to IRA?" And in that question, what this woman highlighted was how paralyzing it can be to rely on a definition. Because, I don't know, is chanting, "We are the real Jews," according to IRA, is that anti-Semitic? Just a thought. And finally, another thing that I do with students, again, because I'm so interested in language and the evolving nature of language, is I show them these tweets. These are real tweets, but they're kind of dated. They're from 2019. And we read them out loud, and some have, profanity, so pardon. And I say, "Okay, everyone, do you think that this is anti-Semitic?" 100%. Done deal. Everyone says it's anti-Semitic. So I said, "Listen, I've kind of pulled over you. None of them actually say Jewish or Judaism. None of them. They all say Zionists in Israel." So the truth of the matter is that it becomes so much easier for these students to see that anti-Semites, just like Wilhelm Marr, that's why Wilhelm Marr is such an instructive and illuminating case study, because he was able to repackage Judeophobia in the 19th century framework, and it sold really well. And that's what anti-Zionists do. They package classical anti-Semitism by tapping into all these tropes, and they're doing it very successfully. So to return to this image, looking at it from the perspective of a literary scholar or somebody who's interested in tropes, I'm not really interested in who is being depicted. I'm interested in the how and the what, in the device itself. And the device here is blood libel. And we know that blood libel is unique to Jews and only Jews. So that particular failure, if you will, in my classroom in 2018 informed my completely different approach to teaching about anti-Semitism, which is moving from definition to identification. So what does this mean for scholars and educators who want to teach about anti-Semitism? Something that I employ is backward design method. What is the goal of your course? Is the goal of your course that students are going to be able to identify modern manifestations of Jew hatred? Is it just to give them an overview? Is it to explore the relationship between politics and anti-Semitism? There's many more, of course, goals. My point being here is that when you work from a backward design method, when you identify the goals pedagogically of what it is that you want, you can then have a much more critical approach of your own approach. So is IRA helping you in the classroom? How so? How not? So I'm just going to end this presentation with these 3 images. Jews control America, Zionism is racism, and Israel is. So to me, these are demonizations, and this is, of course, world domination. I don't need to worry about definitions. I can identify it through the tropes. And we do these kinds of exercises with the students. I show them, unfortunately, or fortunately, I've been collecting. I have tons and tons of anti-Semitic propaganda photos and images and tweets. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and invite you all for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Naya, for a powerful lecture. We have a few questions in the chat, and we also have a hand raised. Charles, we can start with you, and then we'll go to the chat.
First of all, I enjoyed your talk very much. I like your name because it means in Yiddish, new light. I speak a fluent Yiddish. So I enjoyed that. I think one of the issues you have to go back historically If you go back to medieval Spain, or you go back to Germany, even in the 1900s, early 1900s, they both represented very robust periods for Jewish life. And then they disintegrated rapidly. And the reason they disintegrated rapidly is that the Jews basically abandoned their Judaism, and they allowed the anti-Semitic trope to metastasize rapidly. I think it's important for you, the education issue has to embrace a broader narrative of not just the Zionist narrative, which is very critical, but it has to embrace to some extent the Jews standing up for their Judaism in wherever they live, whether it's in Israel or in the diaspora, because they will allow themselves to become the victims of all these narratives you mentioned, the money issues, dual loyalty, all these issues. And it's very important. This is repeating itself again. America is going to be the bastion of anti-Semitic issues within some period of time. It's going to be the ugliest place we've ever seen at some point in the future if we don't address these issues rapidly. And I don't know if they can be addressed because the students on these campuses are being taught to hate their Judaism and to hate Israel. So how do you combat the BDS movement? How do you combat it?
So you're asking a very different question. You're asking probably the most important question. I'm looking at the problem of miseducation. I used to teach in the university for about 6 years, Russian literature and language, but I also taught in the Jewish studies departments and classes on the history of the Holocaust and also Russian Jewry. And one thing that to this day, is very daunting to me is students did not know what the protocols of the Elders are. They've never heard of blood libel.
Terrible, terrible.
Okay, so before we ask, how do we combat BDS? We need to become very educated. And
Right.
by educated, I don't mean in just the Holocaust. In the
Right.
what I've done is give a different narrative to the history of anti-Semitism through tropes. So instead of saying, let's all start with, the birth of Christianity, let's take a look at it chronologically, I'm looking at it structurally, the structural nature of anti-Semitism, and I'm looking at the different tropes. So to answer your question, which is such an important question, how do we combat BDS? Well, one for sure way is not to conflate anti-Semitism with racism, not to universalize anti-Semitism as just a form of hate or bigotry, because it has a very particular sequence, as I've demonstrated today. But you raise a really important point, and something, just as a side note, and I'll stop there. Something that troubles me deeply is that I encountered this form of anti-Zionism myself in 2002, and it's now 2022. It's been 20 years. I'm sorry, it's 2023. I still live it's been 21 years. It's gotten worse, much, much worse. And also we have so many Jewish organizations that are trying to triage this problem. So what's going on? What's going on? So it's getting worse, but we have, and I'm not going to name names today of organizations. We have, the ABCs of organizations that are trying to help this problem. So it's very important what you're saying, but it's a bigger conversation. I'm focusing mostly on education.
Thanks.
Okay, great. We have a few more hands up. Carrie, would you like to go next?
Hi, thank you. I thought your three-part differentiation as an educational model was quite helpful, but I would challenge you that it's not really in conflict with the IRA definition. What the IRA definition in part does is take third category, anti-Zionism, and give a lot of specification and differentiation to it. I mean, anti-Zionism is not a self-evident category to students. They need some examples, they need clarification. And so I think the IRA definition is perfectly in harmony with what you're trying to do, rather than something that needs to leave behind.
I want to be very careful in what I'm saying. I'm not against per se the IRA. I think it's really important and valuable. I'm just, from my experience within the classroom, the way we need to really think about how we're packaging information, how we are connecting dots. In my experience, IRA is very important, but pedagogically, it doesn't help students. It hasn't for me, but it's really important. But I also want to caution us, really I do, because we know, I've shown today that anti-Semitism evolves. And once we define something, we kind of capture it in a certain time. I mean, that's a little bit of my worry when we rely so heavily on a definition. But I know it's very important. So I want to say I'm not against IRA. I'm just offering a different approach to teaching about anti-Semitism that doesn't only rely on IRA. But
Okay, thanks, Carrie. Gary?
Thank you. Am I unmuted? I think.
Yes, we can hear you well.
Naya, first of all, thank you. I think that your approach is extremely helpful. And I've been involved, I'm a psychiatrist, I've been involved in this area with several Jewish organizations in the Boston area for a long, long time. And I do think that the IRA definition has a different function than the pedagogical which you've approached. And I do think that that being able to do what you have done and break down the concepts that are involved will then allow a more accurate way of countering these approaches. So the question was similar to what's asked before, which is how do you counter these? That is, do we have any research or any knowledge about what helps? Does cognitive dissonance help? For example, Zionism is a liberation movement. Palestinians are racist. Those are cognitive dissonant phrases, for example. Do we have approaches that relate to the internet in terms of being able to recognize and block or counter the anti-Semitism? And so those are general questions. And a more specific question is, why did you decide, or did you decide to leave out Islam when you have targeted Christianity as a religious objection to Judaism? Because Islam, although not quite the same, also derogates Judaism pretty explicitly.
thank you for your question, Gary. So to answer your first question of cognitive dissonance, first of all, I'm not a psychiatrist nor a psychologist, but I, of course, know the term. I'm going to say the following. I've been kind of observing, now that I've been out of academia for about 4 years and within the Jewish institutional world, I've been observing strategies. And one of the strategies is what you said, which is we're going to decolonize Israel. We are going to say that Jews are indigenous. We're going to use these words and appropriate them to the Jewish experience. So you have a lot of, especially this is happening so much on social media, you have liberate Israel, Judea, Jews are from Judea, this kind of language. And it's helpful. It really helps. But again, I'm very cautious. I'm cautious because it's the framework. Remember when we talked about power and powerlessness? You're still playing into that framework. I think it's a dangerous framework. you're still playing into that framework. You're saying, here, accept me as a Jew. I'm powerless. I'm the indigenous. Liberate me. So you're agreeing to that framework. And so, which is, I didn't at all talk about, I believe the framework itself is not helpful, because it has, in many ways, it's a completely different topic, birthed CRT, which is critical race theory. This idea of intersectionality. And Jews have said, oh, we're Jews of color, Mizrahi month, there's like a Jews of color. There's BIPOC and there's something now, Jews of color, the categories. So people have tried that strategy where they're saying, oh, we're going to apply that narrative, that language to the Jewish experience, and in that way reclaim Jewish history. But what you're also doing is inadvertently, you are agreeing to play by that powerless narrative. So that's what I'll say to that.
Thank you. I'm not going to take a lot of time, but is there a way of emailing you? Because these are complicated questions and answers, and you have answered something parallel to what I asked, but not really directly on it. And I would like to make it more explicit. So
okay,
if there is a way of reaching
yes,
you.
I just put my email into the chat. And regarding Islam, I'm not a scholar on Islam, okay? And so I know when I talk about anti-Semitism and the three in that model of Judeophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, it's really a European phenomenon, the way I'm looking at it. Has it, of course, the encounter between the West and Islam is very important. Much of right now within the Muslim world, from what I understand, in the year 2014 in Egypt, the most popular book was the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. So, but it didn't originate in the Islamic world, right? It came to the Islamic world from the West. So I'm much more careful when I speak about Islam, because I'm really not a scholar of Islam. I'm not denying that is a very important area and must be studied. And I think ISGAP has so many wonderful scholars who do that wonderful work, right?
Thank you.
All right, we have a few, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Naya, sorry.
No, I was saying, I left my email if anybody would like to write to me. I'd be more than happy to share the presentation. I know that El Shaddai says that it's recorded.
Yes, it'll be made available on the website and our YouTube channel, and we'll send it out.
Right. I just want to really underscore that what I'm doing here is taking it's in many ways pedagogical risks. And I believe in taking pedagogical risks because sometimes you find new ways. And this way has really helped many students who go to campus and they go, oh my God, I was able to identify X because I knew it was blood libel. And, I know the iconography of blood libel. I know that the importance of, there's always a little boy, right? Because of William of Norwich.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. We have a question in the chat from H. Fragman Abramson, who asks, anti-Semitism is obviously a facet of critical race theory, which is now being taught in high school. Do you have some ideas how this can be fought?
Anti-Semitism in high schools? Is that the question?
Yeah. He said anti-Semitism is obviously a facet of critical race theory, which is now being taught in high school. So do you have some ideas on how this can be fought?
Okay, thank you for that question. If I may, I do not think that anti-Semitism is a facet of critical race theory. I think it is a product of critical race theory. What I mean by that is, once again, critical race theory primes people to walk away seeing Israel and Zionists as evil, as usurping power, as being colonial. I do not believe the critical race theory, that anti-Semitism is part of critical race theory, but it is a product. People are primed after critical race theory, after CRT, after ethnic studies, which is something that I here in California am dealing with, or we have this in our schools. Teens who go through ethnic studies are primed to then hold the mantle of the BDS, which brings us to kind of another when I didn't really talk about another function of anti-Semitism, we know this, the Jews, the canary in the coal mine, right? That the overall health of a society, when you have anti-Semitism, it's signaling that something's wrong. So ethnic studies or critical race theory, it's not that it's wrong because it's anti-Semitic, it's that the anti-Semitism is signaling to something much more dangerous about that framework.
Okay. Anita Brahm asks, should hyphen and anti-Zionism be removed?
Okay, so yeah, anti-Semitism, the term, as we know, was coined by Wilhelm Marr. And during that time, that's how he would write it. That's how in German it was written, because it was against Semites. Okay, when we use it with the hyphen, we are reaffirming Wilhelm Marr's narrative and reaffirming that it against all Semites. But anti-Semitism, we know, is against Jews. And Semite is a linguistic category of people speaking Semitic languages. It's harder with anti-Zionism because I haven't, and if anybody here would like to help me, it would be great. I haven't really been able to trace the first appearance of anti-Zionism as a new word. I know that it comes from the Soviet Union. I know that Stalin spoke of Zionist conspiracy, but I would love to trace, just like with Wilhelm Marr, anti-Zionism as I'd like to see the first appearance of anti-Zionism, the word, as a neologism, and understand why is it, and by doing that, I want to understand why, what function the dash has. We don't have to use the dash. I'm not, not particularly, wedded to the dash in anti-Zionism, but this is how we spell it today. But to answer your question, because anti-Semitism comes from the first iteration being Wilhelm Marr in Germany, I'd love to understand where was the first iteration of that neologism. And I haven't been able to find it in the Russian language and English, like the first appearance of anti-Zionism. I know that in Russian, anti-Zionism is written as one word. It is not with a dash. So I'm curious, I'm just very curious, now that you've asked, when it became translated into English, why the introduction of the dash? It's a phenomenal question, actually.
All right. Jennifer Badani, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yes, no, it just puzzles me. I try to remind people, but shouldn't we be reminding people that we're from the tribe of Judah, we're not from Esau? Because they say, oh, you're from Europe, or you're from Russia, you're Khazari, or shouldn't we remind them and go back to Torah and remind them we're from the tribe of Judah, we're not Esau?
Thank you for that. It's very important what you just mentioned. I'm from the former Soviet Union. I was 6 years old when I came here. My parents our religious identity was torn from us, but our ethnic identity was very strong. So in other words, Soviet Jews or former Russian-speaking Jews know very much that ethnically Jews are from Israel. American Jewry is a little bit different, and I trace it back to the Pittsburgh platform. With the Pittsburgh platform jettisoned in many ways the ethnic component of Jewish identity. They had a manifesto. These were Jews in about 1886 in Pittsburgh, where they kind of launched a manifesto, and they said, here, Hinenu, we are here, we are Jews. This is how we understand our Jewish identity. And to your point, Jennifer, they completely tore their ethnic component of their identity and said, we are just a religion, we are only a religion. Now, I get why they did that in the context of the United States of America, a country for religious people seeking religious persecution.
No, I totally agree with you on that, and I get that because my parents came from Europe and stuff like that. Yes,
but my point to you is that from 1886 to now, the effects of that type of understanding of Jewish identity have been quite detrimental, because American Jews don't see themselves by and large as an ethnic group. They see themselves as a religious minority. And that's the problem. Israel is a spiritual center. Is it an indigenous center?
yes,
Right. But that means we have to do a lot of a lot of re-education in many ways. And sorry to use that term, charged with Soviet re-education camps, but we have to really educate people, to remind the youth.
But don't we have to remind, I mean, that's the whole gist of Israel. Israel is, you know, stems from Torah, right? I mean, we could go through the humanistic way, but then we'll lose the whole argument with people then, if you go into that. And we are losing it because of that.
I understand.
But if we go to indigenous and Torah and Bible and stuff like that, here's something.
Yes, and to Gary, who's I think left, to Gary's point, you do see that a lot right now in strategy of Jewish advocacy groups saying, you know, no, we're the indigenous people. Jews are indigenous. Jews are from Judea. You see that language all the time, especially on social media, this reclaiming of the narrative.
And Jacob in the Torah, he changed his name to Israel, right?
Yes.
Important factors here.
I'm not denying, absolutely.
Okay, we have another question from Jill Burke. You should be able to unmute yourself to ask.
I'm sorry, I did not have a question, although I have a compliment. I tuned in to really understand something I don't understand. So I just wanted to say this was very clear and helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Jill. We have a few more questions then in the chat. Anita Brahm asks, in Canada, they push to adopt anti-Palestinian racism. Definition includes right to promote Nakba, BDS. Anti-Semitism is at its root in many ways. How do we make this clear?
You see, and that's the other problem with definitions. It's a Pandora's box. Once you open this definition, now we have the Jewish Declaration. Now the other groups are going to say that, no, we're going to have a definition of anti-Palestinian racism. So here we are. In many ways, we did this to ourselves with IRA. It's not, but to your point, Anita, it seems that the Jewish community is always playing catch up. You are in Canada, correct? I'm in the United States. In the United States of America, we have freedom of speech. And for me, that's really important. I do not want to shut down a Palestinian narrative. Let them have a Nakba day. Let them, you know, it's really important. I don't want to shut down freedom of speech. What is the question, El Shaddai, that Anita's asking actually? Like, what is the question? How do we?
Her question is, how do we make this clear that these are subsets of anti-Zionism?
That what is that, and the Palestinian narrative?
The Canada adopting anti-Palestinian racism. That's how the question was phrased.
You're all asking very important questions, which is action. How do we do? What do we do? How do we confront and combat it? And you know, there's a legal front people could have. People think, well, you know what? If my institution can adopt IRA, it can then help to stop anti-Semitism from spreading. But you know, I've been speaking to some legal experts from the Brandeis Center as well as the Lawfare Project, and I asked them if a college adopts IRA, let's say UC Santa Barbara adopts IRA, will that prevent BDS from coming to campus? And they said no. So then I don't understand how IRA is helping. I don't have an answer for you, Anita. I really don't. I don't have an answer because I myself am at a loss. My way is to educate. And hopefully, when you educate people and they understand how complex anti-Semitism, how particular it is and not universal, how it evolves and mutates, that when they confront it, they will understand and be able to speak up. But you're asking a very important question. Again, I don't know. I mean,
okay.
Humbly, I don't want to just make up an answer.
Ellen Mandel asks, I was born in Germany under Hitler. I believe in calling it the Jew hatred by that name. What do you think about using that term regularly?
I love that term, but academics don't because it's not scientific. It doesn't sound so scientific, but I use it all the time. Because we're not living in the era of anti-Semitism. We're really not. We're living in the era right now of, I mean, we still have some classical anti-Semitism, but mostly it's anti-Zionism. But I agree with you. I call it Jew hatred. That's why in that model that I created at the very top, it's Jew hatred, but the language, it changes.
Okay. And then Andrea Spindle has a comment, not a question. She just says, we can't fight something we can't define, nor can we study it if we don't accept a common definition. Education is not effectively combating education. Education itself is being hijacked, and if every narrative is justifiably okay, we will lose. Facts matter and narratives are competing.
Correct. Absolutely. Right. I agree with you. I'm in agreement that these definitions are important. I'm just saying, let's not overly rely on them. Let's look ahead. Let's be more proactive. Let's look at other methods of helping students identify it. And you're absolutely right. We have acquiesced, or we have given up on truth to narrative. You're right. I agree with it. I agree at 110%. But why? Because again, that focal point of power from history becomes narrative once you introduce power. That's the danger. I completely agree with you.
Okay, great. I think that was our final question. Are there any other questions? If so, this last chance. All right. Well, Naya has graciously left her email address in the chat. So if anybody has any direct questions for her, you're welcome to reach out. Other than that, thank you very much, Naya. The theme for this seminar series was creating a conceptual framework for the critical study of contemporary anti-Semitism, and your lecture so perfectly fit under that. So thank you so much for you, and thank you for everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much, everyone.
All right.